When people imagine medieval soldiers, they imagine battle. They imagine armor shining in the sun, banners moving in the wind, the clash of steel and the charge of horses. But for most soldiers in the Middle Ages, battle was rare. It was brief, and it was not what defined their lives. What defined their lives was waiting. Most medieval soldiers were not professional warriors in the modern sense. Many were peasants called to serve their lord for a limited number of days each year. Others were retainers, men bound by loyalty and obligation to a noble household. A smaller number were mercenaries who sold their skills for pay, but none of them lived in constant combat. A soldier's life was shaped by routine long before it was shaped by violence. When called to serve, a man left behind his normal life. If he was a farmer, he left his fields. If he was a craftsman, he left his tools. Military service did not erase his previous identity. It interrupted it. And that interruption carried consequences. Campaign seasons were usually tied to agriculture. Armies moved most often in late spring and summer, after planting but before harvest. This timing was not romantic. It was practical. Soldiers needed food, and fields needed tending. War followed the rhythm of survival. When a man joined an army, he did not march into glory. He marched into uncertainty. Armies spent far more time moving and encamping than fighting. Days were filled with walking, carrying equipment, setting up temporary shelters, cooking simple meals, and waiting for orders. Discipline varied depending on leadership, but boredom was constant. Armor was heavy. Even simple equipment added weight. A helmet, shield, spear, padded gambeson. None of it was light. Marching for hours under that burden exhausted even strong men. Blisters formed. Muscles ached. Injuries happened without a single sword being drawn. Food was rarely abundant. Soldiers ate what could be transported or taken locally. Bread, dried meat, beans, onions, ale when available. Fresh food spoiled quickly. Hunger was common, especially during long campaigns. Sleep was unreliable. Camps were noisy, exposed, and uncomfortable. Men slept on the ground, often without proper shelter. Rain turned soil to mud. Cold nights stiffened joints. Disease spread easily in close quarters. Illness was often more dangerous than combat. Dysentery, infections, fever. These could weaken a man long before he faced an enemy. Medical knowledge was limited. Wounds festered. Minor injuries became serious. And yet, much of a soldier's life was not dramatic suffering. It was repetition. Wake at dawn. Break camp. March. Set camp again. Repair equipment. Share food. Listen to rumors. Wait for orders. Repeat. Hierarchy structured everything. Lords commanded knights. Knights commanded foot soldiers. Orders moved downward. Obedience moved upward. Questioning orders was not encouraged. Structure kept armies functioning even when morale wavered. For many soldiers, fear did not begin at the sight of the enemy. It began during the waiting. Not knowing when battle would come. Not knowing where it would happen. Not knowing whether you would survive it. The idea of heroic combat rarely matched reality. Battles were chaotic and short. A soldier might fight intensely for minutes. The rest of his service was movement, discomfort, and uncertainty. And when campaigns ended, he returned home changed, but often without reward. Understanding medieval soldiers means looking beyond the battlefield. It means looking at the long days between fights, the physical strain, the social structure, the discipline, the waiting. Because most of a soldier's life was not spent fighting. It was spent enduring. If battle was rare, survival was constant. A medieval soldier did not worry first about glory. He worried about food. Without steady supply systems like modern armies have, medieval forces depended on a mix of preparation, foraging, and requisition. That word, requisition, often meant taking from local populations. Armies rarely carried enough provisions for long campaigns. Before marching, some lords attempted to gather supplies: grain, salted meat, dried fish, cheese, ale in barrels. But transportation was slow. Carts broke. Horses died. Roads were unreliable. The larger the army, the harder it became to feed. So soldiers ate simply. Bread was the foundation. Hard bread if old. Fresh bread if lucky. Pottage, a kind of thick stew made from grains and vegetables, was common when ingredients could be found. Meat was not guaranteed. Salted pork or beef might be issued in small portions. If near rivers, fish was more common. If near forests, hunting sometimes supplemented meals. But hunger followed armies. When supplies ran low, soldiers foraged. They took livestock, grain, stored food from villages. This was not always chaos or cruelty. It was often logistical necessity. Armies consumed enormous amounts of resources. A marching force could strip a region of food within days. This reality shaped medieval warfare. Campaign routes often followed fertile areas. Armies avoided barren land not because of strategy, but because of survival. Pay was another uncertainty. Knights and professional men-at-arms were usually compensated, either through wages or land grants. But foot soldiers often received little direct payment. Service could be obligation instead of employment. Feudal duty required many men to serve for a fixed number of days each year. If a campaign extended beyond that obligation, payment might begin. But payment could be delayed. Funds could run short. Ransoms and plunder sometimes supplemented wages. Loot was unpredictable. After a siege or victory, plunder might be distributed: armor, weapons, valuables, livestock. But this was never equal. Rank mattered. Commanders took first share. What remained filtered downward. Many soldiers returned home with nothing more than exhaustion. Camp life required organization. Tents, when available, were usually reserved for officers and knights. Most soldiers slept under makeshift shelters or open sky. Fires were central to camp life. Cooking, warmth, light, and morale depended on them. Around fires, men repaired gear, sharpened blades, shared stories, and waited. Sanitation was primitive. Large groups of men living closely together created waste quickly. Latrine areas were dug when discipline allowed. Poor sanitation spread disease rapidly. Fleas and lice were common. Clothing was rarely washed during campaign. Armor trapped sweat. Skin infections were frequent. Discipline varied by commander. Some generals enforced strict order, controlled foraging, regulated camp layout, punishments for theft within ranks. Others allowed disorder. Armies without discipline often consumed themselves before meeting the enemy. Not all soldiers were equal in equipment. A well-equipped knight had mail armor, a helmet, shield, sword, perhaps a lance. A poorer infantryman might carry only a spear and a simple padded garment. Equipment reflected wealth, and wealth reflected status. Repairing gear was constant work. Mail rings broke, leather straps snapped, wooden shields splintered, spears cracked. Soldiers needed to maintain what they had, because replacement was not guaranteed. An unmaintained weapon could mean death in battle. Morale fluctuated. Long marches without engagement drained spirits. Rumors spread easily. Soldiers speculated about enemy strength, leadership decisions, or possible betrayal. Leadership presence mattered. A visible commander could steady uncertainty. An absent one could weaken resolve. And always, there was the question of duration. No soldier knew how long a campaign would last. Weeks could become months. A temporary absence from home could turn into prolonged service. Crops left unattended failed. Families struggled. The soldier's world was not heroic. It was practical. Eat when you can. Rest when allowed. Maintain your gear. Follow orders. Endure discomfort. Hope the campaign ends soon. Because survival in camp determined survival in battle. And battle, when it came, would test everything that routine had prepared, or failed to prepare. For weeks, sometimes months, a medieval soldier waited. And then suddenly, he did not. Battle did not arrive with dramatic music or clear signals. Often it began with movement on the horizon, dust rising, banners appearing, scouts returning with urgent reports. Orders traveled down the chain of command quickly, sometimes shouted, sometimes relayed by mounted messengers. There was no perfect formation. In theory, armies arranged themselves carefully, infantry in lines, archers positioned for range, cavalry prepared for charge. In reality, terrain disrupted plans. Mud slowed movement. Hills distorted alignment. Rivers divided forces. Communication faltered under stress. When combat began, It was chaotic. The noise was overwhelming. Metal striking metal, wood splintering, horses screaming, men shouting orders or prayers. A soldier could not see the whole battlefield. He saw only the men in front of him. His world narrowed to a few feet of space. Fear was not weakness. It was constant. Even experienced soldiers felt it. The difference was not the absence of fear, but the management of it. Discipline mattered here more than courage. Holding formation could mean survival. Breaking rank often meant collapse. Combat was physical and close. Most infantry fought with spears, axes, or swords. Shields locked together in tight formation. Push, strike, step, repeat. Battles could resemble brutal contests of endurance rather than graceful duels. A soldier might not even know who struck him. Armor provided protection, but not immunity. Mail could deflect cuts, but blunt force traveled through metal. A heavy blow could break bone beneath protection. Helmets reduced fatal head injuries, yet gaps remained. Faces, thighs, joints. These were vulnerable. Archers changed battlefields, but not cleanly. Arrows did not strike in cinematic precision. Many missed. Some wounded rather than killed. A wounded man became a burden. On himself, on comrades, on morale. Medical care during battle was almost non-existent. A soldier who fell might be trampled before help arrived. Cavalry charges were terrifying. The sight of mounted knights advancing at speed could break poorly disciplined infantry. But cavalry was not invincible. Mud slowed horses. Well-formed spear lines stopped charges. Medieval warfare was rarely one-sided. Duration mattered. Some battles ended in less than an hour. Others dragged on for much longer, with phases of advance and retreat. Fatigue became decisive. A soldier who had marched for weeks, eaten poorly, and slept badly now fought at full exertion. And there was confusion. Orders changed. Leaders fell. Rumors of defeat spread mid-battle. A soldier might believe his side was losing even if it was not. Panic spread quickly. Medieval armies did not collapse from total destruction. They often collapsed from fear. Capture was common. Not every defeated soldier died. Many were captured, especially those of higher rank. Ransom was a financial reality of medieval warfare. But ordinary infantry were less valuable alive. Their fate depended on circumstance. Victory did not erase trauma. After combat, the field remained. Bodies. Wounded men calling for help. Horses injured beyond recovery. The smell of blood and mud mixed together. Survivors searched for familiar faces. Some were found. Some were not. There was no psychological vocabulary for what soldiers experienced. No formal understanding of trauma. No system of care. A man carried his memories home, silently. If he returned home at all, and that return was rarely triumphant, because surviving battle did not mean the war ended. It only meant the soldier continued into its next stage. When a campaign ended, a soldier did not simply walk away unchanged. The army dissolved gradually. Some men were formally dismissed. Others drifted home in small groups. Knights returned to their estates. Foot soldiers retraced long roads on foot, carrying whatever equipment had survived the campaign. The march home could take weeks. There were no parades. In many cases, there was no formal recognition at all. A peasant who had served his required days returned to the same field he had left behind. The crops had grown without him. Sometimes, they had failed without his care. A season lost in war could mean hardship through winter. For wealthier men-at-arms, outcomes varied. If they had performed well and survived, they might strengthen their position within a lord's household. Loyalty could be rewarded with land, protection, or status. But rewards were not guaranteed. Advancement depended on politics as much as performance. Many soldiers returned with little more than fatigue. Wounds healed poorly. Scars remained. Some injuries limited a man's ability to work afterward. There was no pension system, no structured compensation for long-term disability. Survival meant adapting. Psychological weight followed them home. A man who had stood in formation, heard men scream, and seen death closely did not forget it easily. But medieval society did not frame these experiences as trauma. A soldier was expected to resume life without explanation. Silence was normal. Families adjusted too. A returning soldier might find changes at home. Crops lost. Livestock gone. local disputes unresolved. His absence had shifted responsibilities. His return did not automatically restore balance. Some men did not return to ordinary life at all. Mercenaries often moved from one campaign to another. War became their trade. They traveled across regions, sometimes across borders, following contracts and payment. Stability was rare. Risk was constant. Others remained tied to military obligation. Feudal systems required recurring service. A soldier might return home only to be called again next year. Life became a cycle. Work, serve, return, repeat. The interruption of normal rhythm became part of existence. And not all campaigns ended in victory. Defeat could mean imprisonment, ransom, or forced service. A captured soldier might spend months or years negotiating freedom. A family at home might struggle to gather ransom funds. War did not end cleanly for everyone. Even in peace, preparation continued. Weapons were maintained, equipment stored. Lords trained retainers periodically. Conflict was expected as a recurring reality, not an exception. A man never fully left soldiering behind if he was bound by obligation. Over time, this shaped identity. A medieval soldier was not defined by a single battle, but by repeated service, by endurance, by adapting between field and formation. He was both laborer and fighter, both father and combatant, both subject and instrument of power. And yet, despite hardship, not all soldiers saw their service as purely burden. Military life offered movement beyond village boundaries, exposure to other regions, occasional opportunity for gain, camaraderie forged under shared strain. For some, it provided status unavailable at home, but these were exceptions layered over uncertainty. Most medieval soldiers lived between two worlds, the world of routine labor and the world of sudden violence. Neither offered stability. Both demanded endurance. And understanding how they lived requires remembering this balance. Because medieval warfare was not just a series of battles, it was a recurring condition that shaped daily life, social structure, and survival itself.